approach life, and that's a good thing, and it's also just a cautionary kind of addition that
Are you streaming this? Will it be on Zoom?
yeah, it'll be streaming here on our Facebook, and I believe it'll stream on YouTube, but it'll definitely be up afterwards. So I really have
At what
no
time? What time?
Yeah,
Did you say?
7 o'clock.
Okay, thank
I have no agenda, just to have them tell their story. Uh, I know a little bit of their story. I haven't gotten into it in great deal, so I'm not really gonna direct them that much that I know of ahead of time. If I have to while it's going on, but there's no other. They'll have a chance to answer questions, and if people want to talk to them about other stuff, absolutely, but I have no agenda. So it's not like they're here to talk about what should happen in the future. They're I have no issue with you asking them anything, but that's not, we didn't have any preconditions of, somebody's at the gate. We have no preconditions or dialogue of what can be said or can't be said. And I've intentionally tried not to get too into that. So again, I caution people that could be emotional and it could be upsetting, which we don't normally do things here that I know ahead of time that are going to be upsetting. And I mean, Margot is going to be coming here in a month, 4 weeks, to talk about her experience as a survivor of the Holocaust. And I've heard her speak before, and it happened 80 years ago for her. And it's still disturbing to hear her talk about what her life was like. Yeah, Margot's still doing pretty darn good. So I don't know if she's going to come tonight, if she knows about it, but she has some family in town. So I don't know if she's going to be here tonight, but look, as I said a few times, I mentioned it Friday night, I kind of hoped that we would never be talking about Jewish survivors again. And the fact that these people are now going to be telling their story 70 or 80 years from now is disturbing, because it indicates that we haven't gotten too far away from what I was hoping it would be a better world. And of course, the irony that, and everybody has talked about it, that again, I'm just going to say it in a non-political way. And again, the agenda here is not to have politics really be part of this discussion, this presentation, but the horrible irony that the greatest reason for the Jewish people to have a homeland, historical reason, not biblical reason, not spiritual reason, not any other reason other than history, the greatest historical reason is to have a place to protect Jews. And that is, for without question, now a problem. These people came to me through somebody had seen, there's a woman who's organized these kids to come out. She lives in Agoura, and Karen Barnett and Susan Schmidt saw them speaking out in Agoura. And one of the kids, I think, was there, young people, or kids are 20, 21, whatever. But but then we asked if we I said, we definitely would have them come out here. And then I think in the last few weeks, it became even more urgent to have this discussion, and to have not discussion really, this presentation, whatever, to think about this, because as far as I'm concerned, there should be an immediate ceasefire, but there should be an immediate ceasefire based on the release of every single hostage.
Yep.
Bottom line. So hostages released. Hamas claims they never wanted to take civilian hostages in the first place. I get it. It doesn't look good. It's not, I don't know if they intended to do it or not. I'm not in the business of evaluating what Hamas says, but let every hostage go, and then we take it from then it's taken from there. Because to me, that's the that's where it begins and ends. And yeah, you notice my number's not on today. It came off. I just stopped at the grocery store today, and I think it must have come off in the grocery store. But yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, get this back to where it was before, and then you can talk about what happens in the future. But look, I don't think anybody really, the people who really call the shots on both sides don't want this to end. So, you know, it's not ending. So that's it. That's my take on it. And it's
Are these guys on the tour?
they're not on an official tour. They're going speaking to synagogues and to groups around the country, kind of informally. It's not a formal, there's not a formal organization that's running this.
Are they getting paid or?
No, they're getting people are taking them in, letting them stay for a few weeks. Look, American kids wouldn't do this. Not so much because well, first of all, American kids, thankfully, don't usually have to deal with this kind of stuff. Every one of these kids served in the military, so they've already matured at a different level. Yeah, some of them are. But here's the issue. Most of the kids who are here, oh, he's here. Most of the kids who are coming are on military leave right now because they got injured in the attacks. So that's why they're not serving right now. At least 2 of the 3 kids were injured and can't serve right now. But the other reason why American kids wouldn't do this is because American kids wouldn't show up at some stranger's house and stay overnight in their house without knowing them or without having a relationship with them. Israelis are much more laid back when it comes to doing those kind of things. And they're used to it because they'll travel. I think most people know that once Israeli kids are done with their military service, they usually take a year off and travel and do lots of stuff to kind of celebrate
living
this transition, yeah, and being alive. And hopefully not having to serve in the military again. Though now that proposition went away, but at least for the time being. So yeah, so the Israeli kids will travel to Tibet, to Peru, whatever. They go as far away as they can, and they stay wherever they can stay. I mean, they'll stay with strangers and they'll hitch rides and stuff like that. It's a different life. And I mean, people still hitch rides in Israel. It's not as common as it used to be, but especially with soldiers and with people that you see at a bus stop that look like they're going somewhere. I mean, we used to have our bus drivers in Israel used to pick up hitchhikers. Yeah. It doesn't happen. The bus drivers don't do that anymore. I haven't seen that in 20, 25 years, but they used to.
After watching the Twilight Zone about that.
Yeah, you don't want to hitch. You don't want to take a hitcher. No, but the Israeli kids will still do that. So, yeah. So that's also a different thing. So when people say like, who's hosting them or who's this program, this is very unofficial, very Israeli.
Yeah, the civil rights movement, of course. Young people staying wherever.
Yeah. No, Americans used to be like this, Reverend Lynn. There's no question. Americans used to be a little less, yeah, and a little
afraid.
just a little bit more free, and we've now kind of told people to be afraid of everybody, and we are.
I remember being a kid and my father rented a Volkswagen minibus when we were in Israel. And so there were 4 kids and my mother, and we had an American tour guide with us for part of the time. And we used to pick up hitchhikers, and I remember my mother being shocked, but they were always these lovely soldiers, or they were these kids, and they were great company. As a kid, I remember they would talk to us and play games, and it was great.
Yeah, it's a little upsetting still to see the difference between at least American kids at the same age, in their 20s and 30s, early, whatever, late 20s, whatever, even to that era, that age, who knows? I mean,
You need mandatory service.
Yeah.
Military.
yeah, exactly. The mandatory service totally changes their outlook on community, on interdependence, on understanding that you're part of There's other people depending on you, all those kinds of things that grow and are fostered in that kind of environment. But yeah, it's unbelievable when you consider the level of anxiety that Israelis kids should have and the level of anxiety that American kids have, who are not serving in the military and are not worried about going to a music festival and being rounded up. Yeah, it's kind of crazy because when you see that split, and you're like, well, who has the anxiety here? Yeah, and again, it's not like these kids aren't going to have nightmares now. Don't get me wrong, but they are definitely, look, they'll tell you their story. But yeah, it is disappointing to see the level of anxiety that we're fostering with only trying to do I mean, I think the intentions are good. Don't get me wrong. We're trying to protect our kids, but we're doing it at the expense of their well-being and their ability to actually cope. So, and I'm guilty, so whatever. Don't think I'm trying to, speak as the wise, the wise guy who figured it out. So today we're going to be reading two prophets, two pretty short books of prophecy. This is this happened the last time we studied the prophets years and years ago, but these two prophets in particular, Nahum and Habakkuk, there's maybe one or two others, that if you tested people to name you the books of the Bible, this is where they lose. They lose on these two. They don't remember Nahum and Habakkuk. It's a tough one. Habakkuk especially. They're like, Habakkuk? I've never heard of that guy. But yeah, the people who are getting a good grade on the Bible test are going to come up with Amos and Micah, Zechariah maybe. But when they get deep into Nahum and Habakkuk and probably also Zephaniah, then they start to, that's when you weed out the champions. So these are tough. There's no question that these are tough guys to remember. Their books are both about 3 chapters, which is actually kind of the average for, it's not the average. As I said, the average is more like 5 or 6 for the minor prophets. But in reality, if you took out the couple of longer books, that was, we mentioned Hosea and Zechariah are 14 chapters. If you took out those two, the average would come much closer to these. So these are actually a little bit more indicative of kind of what the average book in the prophets, the minor prophets, looks like. These are also books that are in totality written by one author, even though they're very short books. Both of them are considered really good examples of biblical poetry. Both have kind of been, read by scholars as really good examples of stable biblical poetry from this period. Most people don't argue too much about when the books were written. Both of them are from the same period, within a few years of each other, around 615 BCE. So this is the end of the Assyrian dynasty. The Assyrians had about 150 years of power, and then their dynasty, their empire comes to an end. So they didn't have a really long time, but the Assyrians were important because they really were the first empire that came out of the Middle East that had what we call an imperialist, a bent on conquering countries and making an empire. So most people call the Assyrians the first empire.
Where Syria is now.
Assyria is really where Iraq is. It but it does go into Syria. And so there's all of Syria, all of what's Lebanon today, all of what's Israel. And again, for the Assyrians and then the Babylonians, all the way into Egypt. Egypt even became part of the Assyrian and then the Babylonian Empire. So it's confusing, I know, but if you think about the Assyrians being from about 800 to about mid 600s, late, almost to 600. So say almost 200 years, but from 800s to 600s. Then the Babylonians took over from about 600 to about 500, almost 520, not even 100 years, the Babylonians, yeah. They were very small time. And then and then the Persians after that. And the Persians were able to maintain about 300 years of power until the Greeks, until Alexander the Great came through. So that's the order: Assyrians, Babylonians, and then Persians. And the Persians actually were the longest reigning. Though what's interesting is we still talk about the Babylonians as if they were the most important, right? For two reasons. Number one, they had built in Babylon an amazing capital. We talk about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Those kinds of constructions in Babylon, which again today is Baghdad, was very powerful, very beautiful, opulent, like the highest expression of culture at the time. So that's part of it, was that they were very powerful. And Nebuchadnezzar was maybe the greatest of the emperors that came out of that era, on 200 years on either side of him. Some of the Persian emperors like Cyrus and Xerxes, and they were pretty powerful too. But Nebuchadnezzar was simply a unique character to some extent. But the most important thing, of course, was he destroyed Jerusalem. And by destroying Jerusalem, Nebuchadnezzar made himself a historic figure because he became a biblical figure. He became a Jewish biblical figure, and he became a Christian biblical figure because of that. So Nebuchadnezzar becomes very important because of the destruction of Jerusalem. But their reign, the Babylonian reign, was a fraction of what happened on either side. So, but it does capture our imagination. The book of Daniel took place during the Babylonian kings, but it's only about 3 or 4 kings that reign as Babylonian monarchs over that empire.
Is this where Aramaic came in from the Assyrians?
It came in from this area, right? So it came in from Babylonian power and from Assyrian power, but from a little bit later. So it wasn't so much from this period, but from during the Persian period. The Persians, interestingly, didn't make their Persian languages, the languages of their empire. They really made Aramaic the language of all of their Western territories. So much like the Romans used Greek for Israel and for much of the Middle East during their period, right? The Romans didn't institute Latin. Like most of the Jews that lived during the time of Jesus didn't speak Latin. They spoke a little bit, but maybe you could read a sign or two, but they didn't speak it. When they spoke to Romans, they spoke in Greek. When they spoke to people in the countries around them, they spoke in Greek. They didn't speak in Aramaic too. There's no doubt that Aramaic was still spoken by the average peasant, right? So that's why Mel Gibson used it in the movie, because Jesus would have spoken Aramaic as a Jew living in the Galilee at the time. But if he's speaking to the Romans, if a Jew is traveling outside of Israel at that time, he's speaking Greek. So if he goes to Turkey, right? If he goes, well, it's Asia Minor, but whatever, the area that's Turkey today, or if he goes to Egypt, right? He's speaking Greek. In Alexandria, they spoke Greek. They didn't speak Latin. The library in Alexandria, all of those books, all those things, they were all Greek. These people all spoke Greek. So the Romans really didn't institute their own language to be the language, at least, of the Eastern Empire. And that's why during Constantine's time and the Byzantine Empire continued to be Greek. I mean, they were Roman. I mean, Constantine and the rest of the people who moved there to move the empire that direction, they were Roman. They were from that part of the world of Italy, and even Gaul, but they came to the Eastern Empire, they spoke Greek. That's why the Septuagint, that's why the Jewish Bible of the time that was used to teach people was in Greek. That's why Saul, later Paul, spoke Greek. These guys didn't speak. When they're talking to common people who are not other Jews, they're speaking Greek. So
Are we seeing Aramaic in these prophets?
no,
now?
not yet. The only
yet.
prophet that we'll see it in is Daniel. But Daniel is written fairly late. That's why I'm saying that Aramaic was not the language that most Jews spoke at this time, which is 600. By by 300 by the Persian period, yeah, they're speaking Aramaic and really not speaking Hebrew. So for about 300 years in Israel, the people are speaking Aramaic. They're not speaking Hebrew on a daily basis. Again, if they're speaking to Gentiles, they're speaking probably in Greek. Maybe the Gentiles are speaking Aramaic to them too. Maybe some of the Roman soldiers, maybe some of the Gentile colonies, they were speaking Aramaic too. So there's no reason why they wouldn't have picked up the local dialect. But for official documents, for documents that they were sending back home to Rome or back to, they were still using Greek. Yeah, I had to learn Greek. Coins, all the coins had Greek on them, didn't have Latin. All the Jewish coins when they were using official coins of the realm, if you will, in Greek. So very little Latin. And the rabbis knew Greek. We can tell that by the words that they use. They never throw out, I mean, I say never, but very rarely do they ever throw out a Latin word in the Talmud. A lot of Greek, but not a lot
So
of
when
Latin.
this was written, would it have been written in the first Hebrew? You know, the Hebrew changed, right? The writing, the script changed in Babylon. So this would have been written in the original?
Yes, this is still biblical Hebrew.
Okay, I get it, yeah.
Yep. And by the time of the Mishnah, we have a different Hebrew. We have a slightly different, closer to what we have today in modern Israel. We have a little different vocabulary, and we have a much different conjugation of the words. And that, by the way, had been influenced by Aramaic, and to some extent, by the way, Greek and Western languages. The grammar of Hebrew changed because of the West. I mean, people don't talk about it, but it did. So, all right. So Nahum, we know nothing about. We know nothing about him. We know where he came from, and even then, we're not sure where he came from. So why do we not know? Well, because it says he's an El-Koshi, and it's translated usually as an Elkoshite, somebody from that town. We don't know his last name. We don't know his dad's name. We don't know exactly when he lived, because it doesn't say which kings he prophesied during, which we did have for Micah. So we don't know exactly when he lived, but again, we think he lived around the time of Nineveh, which was destroyed around 615. The question, to some extent, for some people is, did he prophesize it, or did he write it just after it happened? But we assume that it was very close to the time that it happened. He talks about the Assyrians. We're going to see Habakkuk talks about the Babylonians, but they're both writing around the same time. Micah did the same thing in the sense that he wrote about the Assyrians and he wrote about the Babylonians, and he lives a little bit earlier than these two. He lives an earlier generation. He lives during the time of Isaiah. But what's interesting about Micah is if he writes about the same stuff, he's actually prophesizing. I'm not saying that like Micah is better at prophesizing, but I will say that he did, if he wrote when we think he wrote about stuff that wasn't happening for about another 100 years, which is pretty good. Pretty good vision. But again, we're not sure. We're also, again, not sure where El-Kosh is. So this is a tough one. Some people say that it's in the Galilee, though we've never found it, if it's in the Galilee. And other people say that it's actually in modern day Iraq. So that this dude was actually taken into exile by the Assyrians and wound up in that area. It's interesting, by the way, I will show you from the modern standpoint. This is an interesting question because there is a place, well, there's a couple of places, but I will show you. This is interesting from today's standpoint because, just pop this up. Let me just pop this up here for you. There's a tomb. This is called the tomb of Nahum, which you can see is in modern day Iraq, northern Iraq, right by the Syrian border, right there. Not actually even too far from the Turkish or Iranian border, but what's important about that is that in 2017, the tomb was in significant disrepair and was threatened by the rise of ISIS. So there's a question of whether they're going to be able to keep it going. And in 2019, the US government announced it would contribute $500,000 to restore the tomb. So that's considered to be a possible location of the tomb of Nahum. It's not the only tomb, by the way, that's in Iraq or Iran. We talked about it before. There's a tomb of Daniel, there's a tomb of Jonah. There's a lot of tombs that and Muslims believe are possible sites. So yeah, here you can see there's a day of Nahum in the Eastern Orthodox Church, right? And he's also, and again, so this is possible where he is, a little bit north of Mosul, which is not far from Nineveh. Also, again, where Jonah, the area of where Jonah might be buried if Jonah never left that area. So let's take a look at Nahum. And it tells you right off the bat, it's about Nineveh, which again was where Jonah was supposed to prophesize against, right? And tell them they're going to be destroyed, and they listen and they're not destroyed. Well, now it's time for Nineveh to get it. And they're going to be okay, like we have in Jonah. So let's take a look at this. Rosemary, would you like to read for us?
Okay. A pronouncement on Nineveh, the book of the prophecy of Nahum the Elkoshite. The Eternal is a passionate, avenging God. God is vengeful and fierce in wrath. God takes vengeance on opponents and rages against foes. God is slow to anger and of great forbearance, but God does not remit all punishment. God travels in whirlwind and storm, with clouds the dust on divine feet.
So you can see right off the bat that Nahum is talking about God that deals out punishment. Now, of course, we do know, as we've read several times in the Bible, that God is erech apayim, that God is slow to anger, right? Is not always wanting to do vengeful, wrathful things. But again, at some point, God says enough is enough. And the vision of God here is that God is in a whirlwind or a storm and is over the clouds. And so this is a God that can come down like a wrathful, vengeful storm God.
God rebukes the sea and dries it up and makes all rivers fail. Bashan and Carmel languish, and the blossoms of Lebanon wither. The mountains quake because of God, and the hills melt. The earth heaves before God, the world and all that dwell therein.
Yeah. And all of those places, Bashan, Carmel, Lebanon, these are all beautiful, beautiful places that, are filled with green grass and beautiful flowers. But when God is angry, this stuff is over. Any of that beautiful stuff, done.
Who can stand before God's wrath? Who can resist such fury? God's anger pours out like fire, and rocks are shattered as a result. God is good to those who have hope, and is a haven on a day of distress, being mindful of those seeking refuge. And with a sweeping flood, God makes an end of her place and chases enemies into the darkness. What will you plot against God? Utter destruction is the outcome. No adversary opposes God twice. For like those besotted with drink, they are burned up like tangled thorns, like straw that is thoroughly dried.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's just take a look at this note. Yeah, we're not really sure that that's people that are drunk, but it's possible that, again, yeah, it indicates some type of enemy that can't, like a person who can't even get up. If that's the understanding of it, but if that's possible understanding, but again, nobody comes against God twice.
Did he refer to God as a her?
Why? Where do you see that?
I heard that female. It was her. She said back further.
God makes an end of her place. But I thought that was,
Oh,
I
Yeah.
thought that was,
yeah, I got you.
but yeah, I thought, I agree with the commentator. I thought it was about the enemies and not about God.
Yeah. So here's the phrase right here. The word is mekoma, which is the hey at the end, right, indicates the feminine. So it doesn't say from his place. But the hey at the end of a word also indicates directional, it's a directional word, letter that goes at the end of stuff. So we talked about it in Jonah, that the fish is called a daga, a female fish, rather than from the fish or out of the fish. The rabbis translated it as, or made midrash that it was a female fish full of eggs. And they had that story about Jonah going from a male fish into a female fish because of the hey at the end of a word. So sometimes there's kind of like an understanding that, well, we're not really sure whether it's the feminine form or whether it's from the place. I think in this case, it's directional. You could say God makes an end from his place, from Mekomah, from his Makom. So, yeah, I'm not even sure why they don't just say that.
Okay, thank
but,
you.
But the enemies are definitely male, or well, no, let me rephrase that. It says his enemies. So it chases the oivav, that at the end tells us it's his enemies. Remember, because the words all have masculine or feminine form. So it's oivim shalo, and it becomes oivav. So it's not female here with the enemies. It's not her enemies, it's his enemies, and that's why wouldn't translate that. But I see what you're saying, because it does. That's the way they translated it. Reverend Lynn, does yours say from her of her place?
No, it says his adversaries, however.
Oh, so it does say that. I don't really get it, because there's an easy explanation for it. Maybe I'm missing something there, but I don't think it's I don't think that's a problem. I guess maybe because it wouldn't normally say from his place, but I'm not sure. But yeah, but the rest of the context is definitely male. Though it is interesting. I mean, if that's the case, the word mekomah here is definitely it's the word makom, which means place.
Seems more directional.
Yeah, I think, but again, the fact that a makom can also could be constructed as a mekomah. Somebody said that was okay. I mean, some people translated it, with the hey at the end. So look, we sometimes call God makom. That's actually another name for God, as makom. We actually at funerals say Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ar Avlei Tzion V'Yerushalayim, right? Hamakom, which is may God. We translate it as Hamakom, as may the one, or may God. But Hamakom has that meaning too, which is weird, because you're like, why is God the place? Well, because God's also called Makor, which means the source, but Makom is also a word that's used. Interestingly, Makom is what the merger of Temple Aliyah and Temple Shomrei Torah is called. They merged last year officially, and they're now called Hamakom, because they are probably going into Shomrei Torah's site. But as you might have read about in the LA Times, they got into some trouble. Which made international news. I had people from Israel calling me and telling me what's going on here. I didn't even know. I actually heard of. Yeah, I like how they. Well, no, they said they said they didn't let the custodial staff know. I will tell you though, this serious for people who don't know. Again, when the group Hamakom, when the congregation merged congregation rented out the facility last month in March to the Islamic Center in that area. They covered up the posters of the hostages. And it was the rabbinic decision on this, by the way. And they admitted that it was. Then they said they changed their mind, but forgot to tell the custodial staff. So it was done anyways. And according to the article and according to all sources and the people that I've talked to there, because I know the people there, the rabbis, it was their decision. It was not the mosque didn't say, the group did not say cover up these pictures. They didn't ask for it. They thought they were doing it as a sign of hospitality and to not make the people feel uncomfortable. I will tell you that Stuart Vogel has been at that temple for 30 years. There are people that are calling for his dismissal, for his resignation, for him to step down. I will tell you, and I haven't spoken to him about it yet because I don't want him to think I'm just, I don't know. I mean, I felt like just reaching out to tell him, I'm sorry this is happening to you. And he apologized, but his whole career is now going down in flames because of this. I can't, that to me is such a tragedy because the guy's done so many wonderful things. He's really well loved. I mean, I talk to people in his congregation who are disappointed, who are upset, but they still care about him and they feel bad. But this is the way he might be remembered. And it's really, really sad. And it all came out of good intentions. I mean, I don't think anybody, really wanted to do anything to hurt people, but it ended up being bad. And I will tell you, it's just indicative of right now at this time, this is not a great time for interfaith dialogue. Doesn't mean that there won't be, and it doesn't mean we should shut down the phones, but just know that right now, there's a line in Ecclesiastes, there's a time for embracing and there's a time from embracing. There's sometimes a time where you don't do things not because you don't want to do it or because it sent a message, but because it's too raw. And in the midst of this, again, when you're in a fight with somebody, sometimes you just got to back off, let everybody cool down, and then you have stuff to. But to try to force it, to try to make people come together when it's not right, does not work. And it's well intentioned, it's well, everything, but sometimes you just got to say, like right now, we're taking a cooling period. We don't want to upset people, and don't shut down the lines of dialogue, not at all. But again, to try to make people. Again, if people don't understand the full context of these things too, it just did not. This was just an example of good intentions, but very bad execution and very bad timing on this. And again, I would simply say, and look, we did interfaith. Let me rephrase it. An interfaith event, which is not brought together by the parties in particular. So if it's like we did a thing for Hanukkah and Christmas with the assemblywoman here, Pilar. She brought everybody together to do a blessing at the holiday party that she had. That went well. Everybody had a little part. Everybody was included, and it came off great. But if we had tried to do it, or if they had tried to do it, or if somebody else had tried to do it from a religious standpoint, actually, what's his name was there? Stephen?
All Saints.
No,
Oh, it's Saints.
St. Stephen's guy, Christopher. St. Christopher was there. He was there. But it's a very tough time. If any one of us as clergy had tried to bring people together, probably not a good idea. But having the governmental official bring everybody together and to do a little thing ended up working fine. I think.
All Saints still bring together.
I think in the sense that if the third party is not directly on one side, then it can work a little bit. So All Saints as a neutral negotiator or mediator. Yeah, it's tough because again, once there's an agenda that somebody can point to and say, but look what you said, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're endorsing what this person said. So that's where it gets a little hard. But yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, there runs a risk that, look, if the person's not going to say anything about the issue as a greater issue, and then they're bringing everybody together, that's a safe spot. But once somebody has said something, because look, the argument of what happened with the Muslim group, which is like on the face of it, that's a wonderful thing to allow them to come in. Let's say they didn't cover, let's say there were no posters, everything happened, they came in. The problem is that the speaker that they brought in for Ramadan has said some very anti-Israel stuff. He's from CARE, and he has been very unabashedly anti-Israel. And so then there was the issue of not just they covered the stuff up, but they brought in a speaker who said some very anti-Israel stuff. So that became an issue too. If it was not hosted by them, you would say, well, I can't be responsible for knowing everything this guy said. So that's why it's a very tough time, and people again can have.
That are disappointing about the United States. That doesn't make us necessarily anti-American.
Very tough. It's very, very hard to do that. But again, there's things that I'll say as an American that I feel comfortable saying, but I don't feel comfortable saying it about Israel necessarily because I'm not an Israeli citizen. My kids don't serve in the military. I don't pay taxes in Israel. I'm very careful to say things about the Israeli government because I'm not a part of the Israeli government. I know I care about Israel and everything else, but I'm not a representative and don't pretend to be an Israeli citizen or speak on behalf of the government as a voter in Israel. If I had a home in Israel, which I thought about, but I don't, and I can't honestly say those things. I mean, look, I remember years ago talking to an Israeli professor who was pretty tough on Israel, and I kind of called him out. I said, look, you're talking to American students who are already anti-Israel. Why are you doing this? And you're kind of an emissary. And the guy said to me, well, and I was in college at the time, he says, look, you're studying here at American University. My kids are in the Army. What are you doing? And I shut up, and he was right. So I've said it before, like I've told that story before. He called me out on my hypocrisy of doing that. I mean, I still think I was right in saying, look, be cognizant of the fact that they're not going to get a lot of different sides here. So no, there's no nuance, and people want a crystal clear answer, and they want a side that they know that they can stand on. And there's no compromise anymore. If you compromise at all, then you're weak, and you're a loser, and you're a traitor and everything else. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, look, as I said at the beginning, I just let the hostages go, and then let's talk about what the next stage looks like. But until there's it just upsets me. It's been 6 months, and to me, if Hamas still has the infrastructure to hold these people as terrorists, as hostages, and they're still that powerful, then there's something wrong. I mean, until they don't have the ability to do that. My hope is that the Palestinian population there uprises and says, we're not going to let these people be held in our territory anymore. But I know that's stupid. Anyways, so but back to where Nahum's coming from, his vision of God. As we said, he says, no one stands up to God twice. So back to the Assyrians.
The base plotter who designed evil against God has left you. Thus said God, even as those days were full and many, even so they are over and gone. As surely as I afflicted you, I will afflict you no more. And now I will break off his yoke bar from you and burst your cords apart. God has commanded concerning him, no posterity shall continue your name. I will do away with the carved and graven images in the temples of your gods. I will make your grave accord with your worthlessness.
Yeah. It was their decision to translate carved and graven images and then use the word kever, which is grave, as the translation. But it's kind of clever in the sense that he's playing off of the idolatry that they were engaging in. But again, he's basically saying you're going to be free. And when you're free, you're not going to be idol worshipers anymore. So the Jews were punished. I mean, Israel, in this case, Israel, Northern Kingdom was punished. That's why the Assyrians came through in the first place. And they're gone. They're going to be gone. So the good thing is you get a fresh start. So let's take a look.
Behold on the hills the footsteps of a herald announcing good fortune. Celebrate your festivals, O Judah. Fulfill your vows. Never again shall scoundrels invade you. They have totally vanished. A shatterer has come up against you. Put up the guard posts. Watch the road. Steady your loins. Brace all your strength. For God has restored the pride of Jacob, as well as the pride of Israel, though marauders have laid them waste and ravaged their branches.
Yeah, and so you can see that at the beginning of this next chapter or this next section, this is, again, what is the positive side, which is that the people are going to be free of invasion. And again, not just the South, but the North too. What's interesting about this, again, this poetry, restored the pride of Jacob, right? The pride of Israel. Marauders have laid them waste. They've, ravaged their branches. Those are the biblical poetry style of repeating, same as the previous one. Put up your guard posts, watch the road, steady your loins, brace your strength. So the repetition of the idea, the second part of the verse. So what did people do back then?
His warriors' shields are painted red, and the soldiers are clothed in crimson. The chariots are like flaming torches. On the day they are made ready, the arrows of cypress wood are poisoned.
And I'll show you here again. Not exactly sure. There are other translations. Reverend Lynn, what does your translation say?
It says chargers, friends, but then the note is cypresses.
Yeah. So again, we're not sure if this idiom that's used here, I mean, there's two very different possibilities. I mean, they're both connected to war, right? This is what people would do. What does the King James say, Mary? From the end of 4. The era.
Well, our pagination is different.
Oh, okay. So where it says his warrior shields are painted red.
3.
Yeah.
Field of the mighty men in the made bread. The
Yep.
valiant men are starved.
Huh.
Chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of preparation, and the fruit trees shall be terribly shaken.
Okay, so all different. Those are all different translations. So you can see some have the trees are shaken, some have the tree wood is poisoned, and some have that it's connected somehow to cavalry charge, to horses going out in battle. Look, they're all possibilities of based on what the other lines say, but clearly these are things that people did when they went out into battle, right? These are different things that they did, and some of them we know very clearly. Painting their shields red, that's without every translation has that. There is a difference between whether they're tulaim are they wearing crimson or are they wearing scarves? That's a little different, but they like this idea that it's a doublet here with the red, but there's some garment that they're wearing, the soldiers are wearing. But those are ways that they're going out in battle. And here's what they're doing.
The chariots dash about frenzied in the fields. They rush through the meadows. They appear like torches. They race like streaks of lightning. He commands his burly men. They stumble as they advance. They hasten up to her wall where wheeled shelters are set up. The floodgates are opened and the palace is deluged. And Huzav is exiled and carried away while her handmaids escort her as with the voices of doves. beating their breasts.
So if you look, Huzav is not translated here. What does King James say, Mary? Huzav, and what is yours, Reverend Lynn, say?
Can't find it.
So it's handmaidens is definitely there.
Mistress.
So Huzav is translated as mistress. Yeah, so what or maiden, yeah. So whether it's here they went with its mistress laid out and exiled, handmaidens escort her, that's it. They're not sure, which is why they don't translate it. Okay, so they didn't translate it, they just transliterated it. So we don't know. But as you can see, it's all over the place, right? There are possible translation issues all over the place, which again indicates to us that we're not exactly sure of the dialect, right?
What is a wheeled shelter?
Oh, up here,
Yeah, wheeled shelters.
that's what they think it might be. So during battle, they had protection over their battering ram so that people could swing the battering ram and not have arrows and hot oil and stuff like that poured on them. So it's a covering, it's a shelter that is over the battering rams so that people can do their
Now I can
job of
picture it.
battering.
Yeah.
Mantelet,
What?
mantelet, M-A-N-T-E-L-E-T.
Mantelet.
You said that.
Rosemary, you're
Yes.
our medieval armor expert.
What's the question?
A mantelet. No, that's a bulletproof screen for a
Yeah.
soldier. Mantelet is like it's like mail. But I guess it could also be portable. It's either one. It says a bulletproof screen for a soldier. So yeah, it could be like this too, or I'll show you. Yeah. So it's some type of protection. This is mantelet. So these are some type of protection. So it comes from the word mantle, obviously, but it's also but it's protective mantle. So yeah, it's sometimes that's what we think.
It says in the article there, you could mount it on a wheeled carriage. So maybe
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
we're thinking of.
So this seems to be some type of stuff
Some
that
kind
they
of
use-
portable shield
yeah,
that you didn't have to carry.
that's connected to
So then you could have both your hands free to
yeah,
wield the battering ram.
yeah. So the word sochech is some kind of shelter. It's like the word we use for the roof of a sukkah, schach, right? It's schach. So it's some kind of protection. But yeah, I mean, this kind of gives you a little idea of what battle looked like in those days, right? Let me just see if this is the only, yeah. The commands burly men does not necessarily, what does King James say? Commanding burly men? It like after the word before the floodgates are opened. The verse that begins before that one.
He shall recount his worthies.
Shall recount his worthies. That's the word you score. Is that what you have, Reverend Lynn? For the verse before the floodgates are opened. How does the verse before that, the verse just before that begin?
Moaning like doves,
Oh,
beating their breasts.
is that the one before that? Before the floodgates are open, what verse is that for you? And the palace is deluged. Okay, so your 6 begins with that? Dang. Huh. So King James and Revised Standard, your Reverend Lynn's has got different numbering too.
The problem is verse 15. I mean, verse 15 for us is 2-1 in the Hebrew one.
Gotcha. So yeah, it's one off. Yeah, I can see that. Though on the other hand, this could be the beginning of the section. I don't know, whatever. It's so it's one off. But yeah. But again, this shows you how much of this we don't know, right? So it shows you how much of the Hebrew and the idiom is not known by us. I mean, every line almost says meaning of Hebrew uncertain.
Because
I think it's, look, if people are using words that we don't know, the only way we can kind of guess is from the context and from the way the words are being used in other places in the Bible or extra biblical sources. So if we find a Canaanite text that has a similar word, or even Akkadian, I mean, we'll use other languages like Akkadian or even Arabic or Aramaic. We'll say, well, there's a word like this there that could be, it's like the famous one we talk about is tahash, which is translated now as dolphin skins. It never used to get translated as dolphin skins. But because we started seeing the word tahash come up in Nabatean texts and Arabic texts, we said, oh, they talked about dolphin skins. So maybe they really were talking about dolphin skins in the Bible. And then people felt comfortable. Oh, and then we also found images of dolphins in Nabatean ruins that we discovered. And we're like, they're obsessed with dolphins. So we're like, why would anyone talk about a dolphin here? So we didn't think that they were talking about dolphins. And then like all the evidence pointed to the fact that it was. So these were from extra biblical sources, sometimes help us understand these words. But this is a case where we still don't understand a lot of these words, why they're used in this content. And almost every line has one of those. So, but yes, it is somewhat because it's poetry and it's meant to be poetic, but not to know the words. But again, we can kind of get some contextual clues. I'm not saying it definitely changes anything to wonder whether are they talking about arrows, or are they talking about, are they talking about trees, or are they talking about chariots? I mean, I don't know. It's not going to change it completely, but because again, from the context we see, this is about winning. This is about taking out the Assyrians being taken out, I should say. Okay.
Nineveh has been like a placid pool of water from earliest times. Now they flee. Stop, stop, but none can turn them back. Plunder silver, plunder gold. There is no limit to the treasure. It is a hoard of all precious objects. Desolation, devastation, and destruction. Spirits sink, knees buckle, all loins tremble, all faces turn ashen.
Yeah. And again, look, we're not 100% sure that's what the last part means, but it's beautiful poetry. Desolation, devastation, destruction. In Hebrew, it's even closer. I mean, they intentionally kept it with the alliteration there, but in Hebrew, it's buka, uvbuka, uvkula, uvkuka, and buka, and these are not even words that we normally use. Uvbuka, uvkuka are it's very powerful. And then to say lev names, peak or kayim, the spirit, the lev, the heart sinks. I mean, that's probably your translation, right, Reverend Lynn? The heart sinks. Yeah, I don't like spirit sink. Spirit sink definitely conveys the intention of it, but it's actually takes away. If you look at what they did by translating to spirits, and this is a minor thing, but I'm just saying this is why translations that try to capture the meaning of it rather than to capture the poetry of it or the think about what it by translating to spirits, look what the person did. If you say heart sink, knees buckle, loins tremble, faces turn ashen, it's all your body. If you say spirit, you're already thinking, oh, this is a spiritual thing. Yeah, maybe it is, but they're saying your body this is affecting you in your body. Your heart sinks. Everyone's felt their heart sink before. It's crazy, right? Your heart sinks. Don't not translate. Your knees buckle. Your loins tremble. Your face turns ashen, which again, we're not sure that that's what happens to the face, but it's definitely panai. It's definitely a face. It's all the body. Does your translation say something? Face turns, grow pale. That's good too. Mary, what's yours say?
And the faces of them all.
Ooh,
What was that?
gather blackness. So here's the word. The word kibutz, like the word kibbutz, means a collection. It means a gathering of something. So kibbutz means a collection. So they don't, I mean, probably the note here says, we don't know exactly, but so the question is, what is it gathering? And the word is then farur. So they're not even sure whether kibbutz, a gathering of farur, whatever farur is it that the face turns, I mean, the way I translate it, and I don't know that I have any basis to translate it like this, is I would say your face turns red, actually, rather than necessarily turning. Okay, so it's either turning one of two things, turning pale or turning red, but your face is noticeably upset, is noticeably scared, fearful. So some people, I guess, would turn red and some people would turn white. But it's some kind of gathering of something, which is why I would tend to go with red, because it's a gathering of blood. It's a gathering of being flush, rather than it not gathering, which would be turning pale. But I don't know. I'm not sure that that's an adequate translation of farur, but it is some kind of gathering, which is why it translated as gathering. But again, kibutz farur could be, again, an idiom that they use for when somebody turns pale. So we just don't know it. We don't have any other versions of it. Now, here we have the phrases, a lion's den, which of course becomes famous in the book of Daniel. By the way, I was talking to somebody, we actually talking to somebody yesterday about Daniel in the lion's den. It's the most famous lion's den we got, is Daniel's. So we were animating Daniel in the lion's den for a story and animation for our Rebbe Tales, our animated midrash that we're doing, which is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. So this new one is coming out. It's called Miriam's Tambourine. And I wish it's an ancient tale. So it's not like, we're not retelling it in the modern way, but it is, I wouldn't say it's a more feminist or womanist midrash, but it definitely is focusing on the women helping, which is Sarah and Miriam are the heroines of the story. They're the ones who are helping a father and son get through challenges, right? So it's at least the women are being celebrated in it. But there's a scene in there where Daniel is shown, and Daniel's in the lion's den. Does anyone know how old Daniel was when he was in the lion's den? Roughly, by the computation of how old he would have been. He was 15 when he got taken into exile. So anybody want to guess how old he was when he was thrown into the lion's den? Because it goes again, like I saw it and I'm like, we did it right. Because,
30.
anyone?
35.
80.
What?
80.
You looked it up.
Well, what do you?
He was 81, 80 or 81. What do you think about that, Sheldon?
The 81, just a few months.
That's how old he was when he was in the lion's den. Everybody thinks that Daniel was like a kid, right? Like all the pictures always depict him as a kid when he's in the lion's den. According to the age, like he would have been in exile for 65 years when he got thrown in the lion's den. Every picture I ever saw of Daniel was he was a kid. It's not. He's 81. So how about showing him in a proper age? How about reminding people that people in their 80s are doing.
And that line would be.
He's too old. They didn't want to eat him. Reverend Lynn says they didn't want to eat him because he was too old. His flesh wasn't good. No, he was courageous, and he was he was a hero at 81 years old, and he was living his best life. He was living his retirement surrounded by lions, which also tells us it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't easy even back then for people sometimes in retirement. But no, really, I always like, I'm like, oh man, was he really that old? And I looked it up and I'm like, yeah, he was 81. So
I can tell you that at this age, I am no longer as fearful of death as I was when I was younger. So perhaps he was at a point where death did not concern him.
maybe.
Or maybe 80 was midlife back then.
No, it's not midlife, but maybe he was in his
Come on, in biblical terms.
his last third. Like if he gets to be 120, he's in his last third of life. But it is I think it's an important depiction that we remember, remind people that, and we need to remember. I've told people this before. Look, if Moses was 120 when he died and they were 40 years in the wilderness, he was 80 when they started out from Egypt. So that goes against every movie that you've ever seen about Moses. But the Bible says he was 120 when he died. And if you go back 40 years, he was 80. I'm sorry, folks. You can't have it both ways. If you're going to tell me that's what the Bible says, then you got to have an 80-year-old Moses leaving Egypt. Which, by the way, means that he probably was in it, with the way we kind of understand it, is he was 40 years living as an Egyptian prince, which is a long time, much longer than we like to think that he was living it. But if we do the math, and again, nowhere does it say he was there for 40 years. But then the rabbi said he was in Midian for 40 years living as a shepherd. So he had 3 lives. He had a life as a prince, he had 40 years as a shepherd, and then he had 40 years as a leader of the Jewish people. But that was his third career, his third life.
So then how old were his kids when that whole weird thing happens with the
Well, they could have,
blood and all that shit?
so the question again is when he goes back to Egypt, how long is that, right? So is he 80 when he had those kids? Or it seems like he has the kids when he first goes to Midian, which would put him around 40. So that means that he left Egypt and would have been, back in Egypt with his kids coming back when he was about 50. But I don't know. I mean, look, you gotta do the math. If you're going to give me 120, which is it says, but that's why again the numbers don't line up as but we don't know how long he was back in Egypt for before the Pharaoh let them go. We don't know how long the plagues and all that took. It doesn't say. It doesn't say how long he was there. Was he there 20 years? Was he there 5 years? Was he there a year? We don't know. I mean, the problem is, Judith, is most of the traditional rabbinic sources don't like the idea that he's back in Egypt with the mission to do for very long. So like the idea that he was back there for 20 years or 30 years, they don't like that. Which means that he did that thing with his sons. And Judith is talking about Exodus chapter 4, the bridegroom of blood scene, that would have taken place, in his 80s. But it also means that his kids would have also not been little kids when they did that, which is also possible, that maybe Gershom and Eliezer are not little kids when they go back to Egypt. But we don't know. I'm just telling you that those numbers are the numbers that we have are he's 120 when he dies, and they were in the wilderness for 40 years. So the Bible sets that up. That's all I'm telling you. So again, that's the point, is in your 80s, you still got stuff to do. And if you have 1 or 2 careers or 3 careers, very biblical. All right. So what does it mean? What has become? Here we go.
What has become of that lion's den, that pasture of great beasts, where lion and lion's breed walked, and lion's cub, with none to disturb them? Where is the lion that tore victims for its cubs, and strangled for the lionesses, and filled its lairs with prey and its dens with mangled flesh?
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. The Assyrians. Yeah. These are very graphic and very, very powerful But you can also see again that, you know, we don't really have words for lions in our language because they
didn't-
use, we've talked about
Whatever
this.
animal they're talking about, it doesn't seem like it's an African lion because the
No.
lionesses do the hunting.
Correct. And here you have Arya, you have the word Arya, Aryot, plural. We have Kfir, which they translate as lion cub or lion's breed or whatever. And then they translate the last word is Gur Arya, which is also lion's cub. So all of those words are used. Gur, Kfir, yeah, or whelps. Yeah, that's the one that they use in the King James. We don't use the word whelp a lot because we don't use the word whelp a lot today. So we don't use, the word whelp doesn't come up, though it's a really good crossword puzzle word, right, Judith? Yeah. Yeah. You could use it. We just don't use it a lot. But they didn't, it shows you that King James really didn't have, it didn't really have the words, even in those days, we didn't have, well, I guess because they didn't have a lot of lions in England. But yeah, we had a bunch of words for lions.
They had a lot of heraldic lions in England.
Yeah, but they imagined them. But yeah, we have 3 words right here: Arya, Gur, Kfir, and Gur. And we actually, yeah, we use all those words today in Israel for names. People will be named Kfir, they'll be named Ari or Arya, and they're not usually named Gur, but as I mentioned before, David Ben Gurion, who was David Green, changed his name from Green, which is clearly about the color green. It's a Yiddish name for green, and he took the name Gurion, which means lion, which sounds a little bit tougher than green. So yeah, so we like those words in Israel for toughness, and of course for the symbol of Judah being a lion. So yeah, we have 3 of them right there. 3 of those words are right there. Okay. Oh yeah, and we have the other one. Well, it still said Arya there, and there that use the word Arya and Gur, but they use the word treif here twice, which is tearing, which we use today for now not kosher, but in those days it meant mangled flesh. It meant torn flesh. Now it means anything not kosher, but in those days it meant torn flesh.
I am going to deal with you, declares God of hosts. I will burn down her chariots in smoke, and the sword shall devour your great beasts. I will stamp out your killings from the earth, and the sound of your messengers shall be heard no more.
Mm-hmm. So that's all laid out at the Assyrians.
Ah, city of crime, utterly treacherous, full of violence, where killing never stops. Crack of whip and rattle of wheel, galloping steed and bounding chariot.
Also very poetic, very poetic. I mean, this is good poetry, right? Using these words for chariots, using these words for horse. And it's the sounds, right? It's the sounds, right? The rikud, they translate it as bounding, or you might even have the translation dancing chariots, probably bounding, right? Does your translation say bounding? Jumping, bounding, yeah. But the word in Hebrew, right? Rikud means dancing, right? So it's almost like they're bouncing, almost as if they're dancing. So these are sounds that they're making as the chariots are coming. You know, the crack of the whip, rattle of the wheel, the galloping. You know, it's really the sounds and the imagery of these chariots coming at you.
Charging cavalry, flashing swords and glittering spears, hosts of slain and heaps of corpses, dead bodies without number. They stumble over bodies. Because of the countless whoredoms of the whore, the winsome mistress of sorcery, who ensnared nations with her whoredoms and peoples with her sorcery.
Yeah. So it's not a great translation because it's tough to translate, but what's really wild here about this, and again, this is examples of really good poetry, is look how he does this chiastic structure of using whore and sorcery, and then whore and sorcery in the first 2, 1, 2, and then 3, 4. But 1 and 3 go together, and 2 and 4 go together. But it's all written together in a way that, they're linking together this sexual impropriety, or again, the fact that he's comparing whoredom and witchcraft together. But the way he writes it out is, again, it's the structure of using not only repetition, but repetition in a structure that requires, that's clever use of language. It's intended. There's a thought process that goes behind something like that. It's pretty advanced.
I am going to deal with you, declares God of hosts. I will lift up your skirts over your face and display your nakedness to the nations and your shame to kingdoms. I will throw loathsome things over you and disfigure you and make a spectacle of you. All who see will recoil from you and will say, Nineveh has been ravaged. Who will console her? Where shall I look for anyone to comfort you? Were you any better than Nahum, which sat by the Nile, surrounded by water, its rampart a river, its wall consisting of sea?
So if you look at this note, and well, that's kind of just basically the same thing. So Ammon was the city that the Assyrians had sacked in Egypt, the city of Thebes, Thebes. They destroyed it. The Assyrians destroyed it, and now they're going to be destroyed. So their sack of one of the Egyptian capitals is now being said, you're going to be just like that place that you destroyed 50 years ago. That was a great city. You took it down. Now you're going to get taken down. Now your big city is going to get taken down. And remember, he never refers to Assyria. He never says Assyria. He always says Nineveh. It's always the capital. And the same thing with Babylon. They refer to Babylon. They don't refer to the empire. They don't call it the empire. They call it the city. And so when they talk about a city being destroyed, it's the capital city. So it's, again, today, if we said we're going to destroy Washington, D.C., Washington will be destroyed, or London will be destroyed. And we're going to say the capital, Paris, will come to an end. And people knew what they were saying when they were saying it. They were not talking about the city.
Populous Cush and teeming Egypt, Put and the Libyans, they were her helpers. Yet even she was exiled. She went into captivity. Her babies, too, were dashed in pieces at every street corner. Lots were cast for her nobles, and all her dignitaries were bound in chains.
So here we see what the Assyrians did to the Egyptians. And so what's interesting is like it happened to us, but it's telling you they did the same thing to the Egyptians, who were much more powerful than us. They're more powerful than us, and if the same thing's going to be done to them. The things that they did to these really powerful countries is going to be done to them.
You too shall be drunk and utterly overcome. You too shall seek a refuge from the enemy. All your forts are fig trees with ripe fruit. If shaken, they will fall into the mouths of devourers. Truly, the troops within you are women. The gates of your land have opened themselves to your enemies. Fire has consumed your gate bars.
Yeah, and here they're not, well, I'll explain that. The Hebrew is pretty clear that they're not talking about the fact that your troops fight like girls. It's not the intention of saying that. But what it's telling us, they're opened like they've opened themselves. Their gates will be opened up like, again, they'll be raped. Their defenses are down, and they will be, that's what's going to happen to them. So again, very graphic descriptions of what happens to your defenses. So
Rabbi?
when they're talking about, and how do we know that? Because it says, Hine amcha nashim bekerbecha. When you're talking about your defensive troops. They're talking about the armies that are inside. When it says the troops within you, they're not talking about within your country. They're talking about specifically within Nineveh. So your defenses, your defensive troops, not the ones that are out fighting, but the ones that are guarding your city, will be entered like the city. Yeah.
You kind of answered my question. I mean, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know that? How do they come to a conclusion that they're not being literal?
Because the word bikirbecha, which means inside of you, within you, the troops within you are going to be raped like women. That's what
Where's
it
the
is.
word rape? Where's the word raped?
It's they're being entered.
So
Patuach,
it's implied.
patuach and niftachu. The opening is used twice. That's what the word patuach means. It means opening. Your entrance is going to be ravaged. Your gate is going to be ravaged, and your troops will be ravaged like a gate. So that's they look. It's a very powerful image. That's what I'm saying. The language here is very highly advanced. To play off the language like that. And again, that's why, like, if somebody read this and didn't know that the Hebrew is actually telling you that it's not they're women, they fight like women, they're not saying that. First of all, they don't say that in the ancient world. They're not saying women can't fight. They knew that women could fight, and it's not even an issue. It's not even a slang, you fight like a girl. It's not like you don't see that in the Bible. What they're saying here is you're going to be raped like a woman, which again is not a great image. I'm not saying it's feminist, but it's saying this is what it actually means. And again, the words here are birkebecha and patuach and niftachu. And those are all openings. That's what they're seeing it as. And again, it's very clever. It's very graphic, and it's very, like, if you know the language, they're basically playing off of that. Yeah.
Draw water for the siege, strengthen your forts, tread the clay, trample the mud, grasp the brick mold. Their fire will devour you. The sword will put an end to you. It will devour you like the grub. Multiply like grubs, multiply like locusts.
So there's again what we saw in the prophet Joel, a lot of stuff about locusts, about that kind of plague. But here's stuff about, making you're fortifying your walls. Very graphic and very poetic imagery.
You had more traitors than the sky has stars. The grubs cast their skins and fly away. Your guards were like locusts, your marshals like piles of hoppers that settle on the stone fences on a chilly day. When the sun comes out, they fly away. And where they are, nobody knows.
Yeah, so your army is going to fly away like those grasshoppers.
Your shepherds are slumbering, O king of Assyria. Your sheep masters are lying inert. Your people are scattered over the hills, and there is none to gather them. There is no healing for your injury. Your wound is grievous. All who hear the news about you clap their hands over you. For who has not suffered from your constant malice?
And that's the way it is. So you're coming to an end, and no one's sad about it. Everybody has dealt with your garbage, Assyria, and no one's sad about it. So you're getting your payback. Very powerful imagery. And again, interestingly, some of it can still work for today. Some of it's still, a lot of it is still very powerful in our ears today. And again, the way he plays on visual imagery, things that you'd hear, things that you'd see, things that you'd feel, very powerful. So he again, even though it's not a very long prophet, his imagery and his use of language is really, really high. And again, part of it, unfortunately, we don't really understand because we don't understand all the Hebrew. But let's take a quick gander at Habakkuk, which is also, again, very short. And again, these chapters are very similar in intention and in kind of hope for what's going to happen to the people that are not Israel. These. I mean, he said a little bit about idolatry, which was again on us, that we're not going to have idolatry anymore. The idolatry that we had, that the Assyrians have, it's all linked together, and it's going to come to an end, which we also saw in Micah. But look at this guy. This is again another guy, Habakkuk, who we know nothing about. Yeah. No. But similar times,
What was the
and
question?
not as Micah, but Habakkuk and Micah, Habakkuk and and Nahum together are written around 615. And again, Habakkuk is talking not about the Assyrians, but about the Babylonians. And you'll see why. But again, it's good to read them both today because you'll see the similarities between these people. We know nothing about him. We don't know where he lived. We don't know.
You don't even know his
We
father.
no. We think he lived in the south as opposed to Nahum, who probably probably lived in the north. He's definitely concerned with the Assyrians, but we don't know for sure. Might have even gone into exile, as I mentioned. Habakkuk, we really don't know. And the thought is that he might have been in the south. There is a legend, or actually, I wouldn't even say it's a legend. It exists in some of the stories about Daniel, that Habakkuk went to Babylonia to look after Daniel. It's not here at all in the Bible that we have, but there are legends about it. Yeah, he would have lived around the time of the Babylonian destruction of Assyria, not of Israel, but of Assyria. So about 30 years before. Remember, they conquered the Assyrians in about 615, and then 30 years later they conquered Judah. They conquered Jerusalem. So here's what it says about Habakkuk, what he saw. And again, his name is very unusual too. I'm not even really sure what his name means. Some people think it's connected to the word chavak, means to embrace. We're not really sure where the word comes from. You know, it's an unusual name, not a name that we see a lot. So let's take a look. Keep going, Rosemary.
The pronouncement made by the prophet Habakkuk. How long, O eternal one, shall I cry out and you not listen? Shall I shout to you violence and you not save? Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you look upon wrong? Raiding and violence are before me. Strife continues and contention goes on. That is why decision fails and justice never emerges. For villains hedge in those whose cause is just. Therefore, judgment emerges deformed.
Now, this has nothing to do with other countries. This is just the unfortunately, as he's talking about, the nature of dealing with injustice. And it's a pretty powerful line.
Look among the nations, observe well and be utterly astounded, for a work is being wrought in your days that you would not believe it if foretold. For lo, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce, impetuous nation, who cross the earth's wide spaces to seize homes not their own. They're terrible, dreadful. They make their own laws and rules. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fleeter than wolves of the steppe. Their steeds gallop, their steeds come flying from afar like vultures rushing toward food.
So you can see some of the descriptions of the Babylonians in warfare, right? And again, they're terrible and dreadful. And again, according to this, or at least the way that we translate this, they make their own laws and rules, or again, they make rules for themselves. Yeah, but here's what they do.
They all come bent on rapine. The thrust of their van is forward, and they amass captives like sand. Kings they hold in derision, and princes are a joke to them. They laugh at every fortress. They pile up earth and capture it. Then they pass on like the wind. They transgress and incur guilt, for they ascribe their might to their God.
Interesting, right? Because this powerful nation is doing what they believe their God is telling them to do. Interestingly, again, the Assyrians seem to have had a similar issue, which to some extent goes to us too, that God is on our side when we go out into battle. But they believe that they're literally behaving like what their God has given them as power. And again, it's not that they're right. It's not that they're acting in God's, they're not bringing justice on God, but their strength comes from God. And for them, it's koho, it's their strength, their koach. It is their strength, right? Their might, their power.
Hey, Rabbi,
Yeah.
You scroll back up a second.
Uh-huh,
This,
uh-huh.
down, down a little bit right there. That last line, they pile up earth and capture it, this is totally separate to what you were mentioning, but it's the first time I've ever seen anything close to what we saw at Masada, or the history of Masada. They pile up earth and capture it. So
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure
Here it seems like an interesting, here it's an interesting allusion to afar, which is dust. But when they gather it up or capture it, it's almost as if they're playing Risk, and they're just capturing kingdoms, right? So it's more here like they're just piling up more countries.
okay.
They pile them up, and they can do it. But again, there probably is some kind of play on the fact that they would use battering rams, and that no fortress can keep them out. But yeah, I think it's also this idea of they're just like collecting Monopoly cards. So
So it's both.
yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's possibly both, that they're raising up land in order to capture another piece of land, but like they don't have to do that. They don't. Most of the siege, equipment, like the battering rams and things like that, they didn't have to raise up land. For Masada, they did, because it was a fortress. It was on top of a mountain. But here, it's like every fortress, and the kings and princes, like it means nothing to them. Borders, national boundaries mean nothing to them. They don't care. Like, you can tell me you're a king you're not a king anymore. You're now part of our empire. It's done. So that's what's so cool about it, is that they're like, it doesn't mean anything to them. They don't care about you come to me and say you're a king. You're nothing. That's what's so powerful about what he's just, how he's how he's shown us the way the Babylonians look at people. Okay.
You, O Eternal One, are from everlasting. My holy God, you never die. O Eternal One, you have made them a subject of contention. O Rock, you have made them a cause for complaint. You whose eyes are too pure to look upon evil, who cannot countenance wrongdoing. Why do you countenance treachery and stand by idle while the one in the wrong devours the one in the right? You have made humankind like the fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler. He has fished them all up with a line, pulled them up in his trawl, and gathered them in his net. That is why he rejoices and is glad. That is why he sacrifices to his trawl and makes offerings to his net. For through them his portion is rich and his nourishment fat. Shall he then keep emptying his trawl and slaying nations without pity?
So the prophet is definitely taking God to task for why he allows the Babylonians to do what they're doing. God, you can't see this, right? Is it because you don't want to look upon evil, right? It's happening, God. You're standing by idly while this is happening. And he's comparing the people that are getting caught up in this like fish in a net. You're allowing people to get caught up in this, and the Babylonians are just conquering everything, and they're literally like pulling everything out of the ocean, and you're not doing anything about it, out of the water. You're not doing anything about it, God. Right? So so they're saying that they're in the scroll of Qumran, it's doesn't use the word trawl there anymore. I mean, this is only because we found the Dead Sea Scrolls that we have a note here that it says where it says Cheremo, that in the Qumran text it says Haribo, which means his sword, drawing his sword, which look, from the context of what he used here, they use the words cherem every time, which is net or trawl. They're translating it as trawl or net. And here they're saying we have a text in the Qumran in Dead Sea Scrolls where it says he shall keep taking out his sword, right? Disarming his sword, or drawing his sword and then killing, as opposed to net. But you look from the context, they use the word net every time. There's the same word, right? But they're saying there is a text which then goes away from nets to swords. I mean, look in Hebrew, if the mem, which could look very much like a bet, like literally just a line that, maybe somebody did, incorrectly, one letter, it could be. So they're saying there might be that's all they're saying about that. But seems to be the context is a lot about nets and being caught up in a net, which of course you're caught up like a fish that can't go anywhere. You're taken out of the water. So that's used in not so much in the Bible that much, but it's used a little bit. But because Jews weren't really fishermen, it wasn't used a lot, I don't think. But they knew it enough that they could. But you'll see it in some of the Proverbs and you'll see it occasionally. But yeah, again, we were not fisher people, so it was not like used a lot. All right, so let's look at chapter 2. This is slightly different, but that's why there was a break here. But let's see what he says here, what Habakkuk says.
I will stand on my watch, take up my station at the post, and wait to see what God will say to me. What will be the reply to my complaint? God answered me and said, write the prophecy down, inscribe it clearly on tablets so that it can be read easily. For there is yet a prophecy for a set term, a truthful witness for a time that will come. Even if it tarries, wait for it still, for it will surely come without delay.
So this is what happens in chapter 2. We have a setup for how bad the Babylonians are, how dangerous they are, how vicious they are. And now you can see what he's doing. God has just told him, I'm going to tell you something. And this, by the way, is interesting because this seems to tell us that Habakkuk got this message about the Babylonians a good 100 years before it happened. So if the Babylonians don't come to an end until the 500s, late 500s, like 480, 500, around that time, that means that this is 100 years before, because this is 600. So he's saying it's going to happen.
Lo, their spirit within them is puffed up, not upright, but the righteous are rewarded with life for their fidelity. How much less, then, shall the defiant go unpunished, the treacherous, the arrogant, who have made their maw as wide as Sheol, who are as insatiable as death, who have harvested all the nations and gathered in all the peoples.
Now here, there's no question that they're using Sheol and death synonymously. So when we say that Sheol is hell, you got to be a little careful, because in some places it's very clear, and again, it's poetry. I don't want to make distinctions from, necessarily make a whole comment about what Sheol meant at one time and maybe meant to one person and not to another person. But the idea that Sheol is the afterlife or hell, here it's completely synonymous with death, with mot. And the reason why it's capitalized is because the Babylonians and the Assyrians, and maybe even the Jews, saw mot or mavet as a god or as a entity, or of course later on, the angel of death is insatiable.
Sheol began as an entity.
As a, not necessarily entity, but as a synonym for death. Not necessarily hell, not necessarily a place of,
But not the
no. Though, again, the reason that Sheol is capitalized and why death is capitalized is because these are clearly either destinations or proper names. So it's not death, lowercase, it's death. And so it's paralleled with Sheol, and here it's insatiable. It's, of course, they're like, Babylonians have been like death. They've harvested the nations. They, again, using the symbols that they used before of gathering them up like fish or like animals that you're collecting in a net. By the way, they collected birds in nets too. but they're gathered together, or kibbutz, again, the word here, kibbutz, to gather together, gathered them in, but not for good. Obviously, they're like death. They're like death. But it tells us that death is insatiable too, by the way. Death is insatiable. Death is always looking for more. It's not a good thing. It's not a good thing, but it is saying that death is insatiable. Again, almost putting death as, and it's not that death is only insatiable because of the Babylonians. Death is insatiable. So are the Babylonians. Okay? They're insatiable as death. That's why they translate it. Mary, what do you have? Yeah, satisfied. Can't be satisfied. Reverend Lynn, is that what you got? It's got to be. The word lo yishba means isn't satisfied. Isn't insatiable is a good translation. Okay.
Surely all these shall pronounce a satire against them, a pointed epigram concerning them. They shall say, "Ah, you who pile up what is not yours, how much longer? And make ever heavier your load of indebtedness. Right suddenly will your creditors arise, and those who remind you will awake, and you will be despoiled by them. Because you plundered many nations, all surviving peoples shall plunder you. For crimes against humans and wrongs against lands, against cities and all their inhabitants. Ah, you who have acquired gains to the detriment of your own house, who have destroyed many peoples in order to set your nest on high to escape disaster. You have plotted shame for your own house and guilt for yourself. For a stone shall cry out from the wall, and a rafter shall answer it from the woodwork. Ah, you who have built a town with crime and established a city with infamy, so that peoples have had to toil for the fire and nations to weary themselves for naught. Behold, it is from the God of hosts, for the earth shall be filled with awe for God's glory, as water covers the sea.
Yeah. So you can see that he's saying, look, your city, Babylon, is being built on other people's disaster, by you stealing from other people. And those people are going to come back and get you. Those people will get their stuff back because they're going to eventually loot you. Yeah.
Ah, you who make others drink to intoxication as you pour out your wrath in order to gaze upon their nakedness. You shall be sated with shame rather than glory. Drink in your turn and stagger. The cup in God's right hand shall come around to you, and disgrace to your glory.
So again, you're sitting there partying, right? What's going to happen to you? You're going to wind up being shamed. The people that you shamed, you're going to now be shamed. So you make others drink to intoxication. Look, and again, so you can gaze on their nakedness, which I think is essentially, it's a pretty good translation.
It kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of Vashti and Purim.
Yeah, it also reminds us of Noah,
Mhm.
right? Who drank and then they looked at him when he was naked, which is actually the one that they quoted. That's Genesis. That's Noah. He drank wine, became drunk, and covered himself, and they saw his father's nakedness. But in this case, he's getting other people to drink.
That's what started the whole thing.
Yes, there you go. I knew you were going to say that. Right on time.
The Three Stooges.
Yeah. Go watch the movie Noah if you want to know what John's talking about. Go watch Darren Aronofsky's Noah to know that, yeah, it's a problem. So here's what's going to happen to you.
For the lawlessness against Lebanon shall cover you. The destruction of animals shall overwhelm you. For crimes against humans and wrongs against lands, against cities and all their inhabitants.
Which, by the way, it's also saying what you did to Lebanon, you're going to pay for that, which is not us necessarily. I mean, sometimes Lebanon was part of Israel, but and the word again here is lawlessness. It's not really lawlessness. What is the translation you have, Reverend Lynn?
Hamas.
Verse 17?
Violence done in Lebanon, the destruction of the beast.
Yeah, Mary, what do you have for her? Yeah, the word's Hamas, my friends. Ki Hamas Lebanon. That's interesting. The lawlessness against Lebanon. Cover it. That's pretty wild. Ki Hamas Lebanon. That's pretty wild, especially since Hezbollah is attacking from Lebanon to help Hamas. Dang.
Still the same way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's a play. I mean, they know that their word Hamas is violence. So, wow, that's a pretty weird one. You can use that one. Ki Hamas Lebanon. This is somebody I'm sure did a thing on that already. A prophetic thing on the fact that that's wow. Ki Hamas Lebanon. So the violence against Lebanon. Anyways, but it's putting Hamas with Lebanon, which is pretty well. All right.
What has the carved image availed that its maker has carved it for an image and a false oracle, that the one who makes an item has trusted in it, producing dumb idols? Oh, you who say, wake up to wood, awaken to inert stone, can that give an oracle? Why, it is encased in gold and silver, but there is no breath inside it.
Great little poetic play on the idols that these people worship. Wake up, right? They say to,
Mary's the best reader.
she is the best reader. That's why we love her. Well, we love her for a lot of reasons, but her reading is definitely amazing. But it is so poetic, so powerful, and she brought it to life. And here's the last line.
But God in the holy abode, be silent before God, all the earth.
So here's this great line, which is, wake up, awaken. You scream at those idols, but you're not gonna say a word to God, because you did this. You did this, right? Don't say to God anything. You can scream at idols that don't make any, that aren't going to listen, that aren't going to move, but you be silent before God. Hush, 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 onomatopoeia. And so we finish with this last chapter of Habakkuk, which is called
A prayer of the prophet Habakkuk in the mode of Shiganot.
So if we look at that, we're not exactly sure what a shiganot is. But what do you have there, Mary, for? It just didn't translate it, right? And same thing? Yeah. So it's some kind of song style. It's either the way it was supposed to be played, or it was the way it was supposed to be sung or read with a certain rhythm. Mm-hmm. And we have those notes on the Psalms all the time. We have notes like this. It'll say on a certain type of instrument, or we think, or it'll say Yelat Hashachar, which we're not even sure. It means the dawn of the morning, which we think was some kind of instrument. But yeah, we have these things that we just don't know. We don't know what it is. So we think it's some kind of psalm style. So we have one. We have a shigayon, which is a shigayon of David, which of course it's going to say something like, doesn't really say. It says meaning of Hebrew uncertain. So yeah. So it tells us that we don't know how this was supposed to be sung, but Rosemary's going to do her best, and she'll do great. So here is the Shigayon, the poem or prayer of Habakkuk, which we finished with today.
O Eternal One, I have learned of your renown. I am awed, O Eternal One, by your deeds. Renew them in these years. Oh, make them known in these years. Though angry, may you remember compassion. God is coming from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah. God's majesty covers the skies. Such splendor fills the earth.
And again, when we see the word Selah, right? Musical direction. We don't know what Selah means, but we have it all through the Psalms. Yeah. Was it like, did that people go, ah, we don't know what they did when they came to Selah, but we use the word all the time in the Psalms, and we just translate it as Selah, like hallelujah or something, but we don't really know what Selah means, but that tells us that this is some kind of song. This is some kind of direction that we were supposed to do here. But again, God is coming from the east. God's coming out of the east. Look at what it looks like.
It is a brilliant light that gives off rays on every side, and therein God's glory is enveloped. Pestilence marches in front, and plague comes forth at God's heels. God standing up makes the earth shake. A mere glance makes nations tremble. The age-old mountains are shattered. The primeval hills sunk low. God's roots are ancient. As a scene of havoc, I behold the tents of Cushan. Shaken are the pavilions of the land of Buniam.
And again, these are all places to the east of us. In modern day Jordan, Saudi Arabia, these are to the east of us.
Are you wroth, O Eternal One, with Naharim? Is your anger against Naharim, your rage against Yam, that you are driving your steeds, your victorious chariot?
So what's going on here? We think now, what does the King James say? What did we say in the 500 years ago? What did we say, Mary? Uh-huh.
Was thy anger against the rivers.
Yes. So the words Neharim and Yam are oftentimes used as descriptions of water. Nehar is a river. Yam can be waters of like lake or sea. What does yours say, Reverend Lynn? So maybe so it could be verse 8. Something about
Wrath against the rivers. Was thy anger against the rivers, nation against the sea?
yeah. So there they use the word Yam, they translate it as sea. We got a little bit more sophisticated in the last few years because of course we found descriptions of God's fighting Yam and Neharim, and this is a possibility. And based on the languages that's used here, these are sea monsters that God's destroyed in other stories. And again, we have versions of this even within the Bible, in Psalms and Job. So it seems as though, again, from Canaanite poems and Psalms, the Canaanite Psalms, that they were referred to as actual entities that their gods destroyed. So like God destroying, and that's what this translation is trying to say, as God destroyed these ancient monsters, God's going to destroy all of the enemies.
All bared and ready is your bow. Sworn are the rods of the word. Selah. You make the earth burst into streams. The mountains rock at the sight of you. A torrent of rain comes down. Loud roars the deep. The sky returns the echo. Sun and moon stand still on high as your arrows fly in brightness, your flashing spear in brilliance. You tread the earth in rage. You trample nations in fury.
Folks, this is God. This isn't Israel doing this. This isn't Judah doing this. These aren't people doing this. This is God doing this. Because God's doing this because the natural world, he can control the natural world. They're not moving the sun and moon. The mountains are being crushed. I mean, we have this throughout Psalms. I mean, these are not like the only place. We sing Psalm 114 at Seder about the mountains dancing and the hills skipping as we were freed from Egypt, right? So this is not the only place we have this, and especially in poetic, in poetic places, in songs that we use this kind of language. But this is God doing this.
You have come forth to deliver your people, to deliver your anointed. You will smash the roof of the villain's house.
Bless you. We lost you. We lost you, Rosemary.
Oh,
We lost you. You will smash.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. You will smash the roof of the villain's house, raise it from foundation to top. Selah. You will crack the enemy's skull with your bludgeon. Blown away shall be his warriors, whose delight is to crush me suddenly, to devour a pauper in an ambush. You will make your steeds tread the sea, stirring the mighty waters. I heard, and my bowels quaked. My lips quivered at the sound. Rot entered into my bone. I trembled where I stood. Yet I wait calmly for the day of distress, for a people to come to attack us.
So again, he's telling the people, the Babylonians are coming. They're going to be bad. They are bad. We've already seen what they can do to other people. They've already done it to the Assyrians. They're going to come. They're going to come, but they will be destroyed, right? And again, using similar language to what we just saw with Nahum, it affects my body. My bowels quake, lips shiver. No, this is the people watching this, because it finishes, I wait calmly, right? I'm going to wait calmly for the day of distress. I know it's happening. Yom Tzara, the day of tsuris, right? The day of troubles. It's coming. But again, what's it going to tell us? They're going to come to attack us. And again, you can see I am physically affected by this. And it's not as pretty as the language of Nahum, but it's still, again, look at how the whole body is: bowels, lips, bones. Here we go.
Though the fig tree does not bud and no yield is on the vine, though the olive crop has failed and the fields produce no grain, though sheep have vanished from the fold and no cattle are in the pen, yet I will rejoice in God, exult in the God who delivers me. The sovereign God is my strength, making my feet like the deer's and letting me stride upon the heights for the leader with instrumental music.
So there's a little thing there at the end,
stage
right?
direction there.
Lam Natseach benigionot. And that's, we got a little music there. And again, that's the way they translate it. They translate it as for the leader, maybe some kind of nigun. That's where we get the word nigun from, right? A melody with that, we use it as a melody that is just a melody, right? No words. So that's why we translate it as an instrumental. And then there comes in an instrumental at the end. And then you hear that. But look, he's telling people it doesn't look good, right? It doesn't look good. The fig tree doesn't have anything. There's nothing on the vines. There's no fruit there. There's no olive crops. Those things come all the time. There's always supposed to be something there. Fields don't have any grain. There's no livestock. Everything looks gone. But I don't give up because I know that God is coming. So again, he's shooting past the Babylonian destruction to the time when the Babylonians are going to be there. So the Babylonians haven't even come yet, and he's already saying it's not going to be bad because it will be bad, but it's not always going to be bad. When you look at what it's like now, it's not going to stay that way, and the Babylonians will be punished too. So what's good about what we read today is the Assyrians, they were being told during their own time by Nahum that they're going to be, or we were told that they're going to be destroyed. But now we know that even the next people, the people who are destroying the Assyrians, they're going to be destroyed. And again, he is saying they're going to be worse than the Assyrians. I mean, you think the Assyrians are bad. The Babylonians, they're not afraid of anything. They just stack people up, and they don't even pretend to make these people, like the Assyrians tried to make us vassals. They tried to keep us like a country. They said, okay, your king can stay here. The Babylonians kind of did that. It didn't work out. And it could be because just the Babylonians had a lower threshold for garbage. They pretty much said, no, we're putting a governor over you. You're not a country anymore. So that happened. But Habakkuk is looking past that to a time when people will be safe again. So it's very, I mean, it's good we could read both of them together today to see those two prophets who kind of are talking about different people, a little bit different message, but they're similar enough. And we say, Tam v'neshalem tehillah el borei olam, as we finished 2 books today, 2 little books. We say we're giving praise to God, the creator of all creation. And again, as you can see, God is very concerned about everything, because guess what? You killed people, but you also killed animals, and you also killed the trees, right? It says the destruction of animals, crimes against humans, and wrong against land, right? So you destroyed the trees of Lebanon, you destroyed animals, and you killed people. You destroyed everything. Well, they hadn't done it yet, but they're going to. And God said, and you're going to be held accountable for all those crimes. It seems like he wrote this for music. That's the thing. And so I guess it could have been adapted, right? They could have taken his thing, but it seems like he wrote it for that, which is why, or again, they could say that we threw in the word Selah and we changed it a little bit so that it would rhyme or have the right meter for the song. Because, they had a song and they had to, look, I'm going to tell you something that you may not know. Every song that we have has to be 3.5 minutes still. We haven't had 45s in a long time. But that idea of having a song that was 3.5 minutes so that it could be played on the radio or so that it could be put on a 45, if you're a musician, you had to write a song that was 3.5 minutes, no longer. And that's crazy. That was a form, my friends. That was a form of rock music and pop music for the last 60 years, so almost 70 years. So think about it. We still do it. We still do it today, even when we don't have to. Even when we don't have 45s, people still don't write songs that go on that. There always will be an In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, right? There'll always be a Taylor Swift. She has some 10-minute song. My kids always remind me. But for the most part, you can't do that, right? You can't go out of that time. So, and we still have it. So think about that. We're not so advanced that we don't have musical. I would argue maybe we're even sillier because they probably had a lot of different musical styles for things that could be, 10 minutes or something that was 20 minute, whatever. But we have like 3.5 minutes, and it's always been like, there's very few of those songs that go over. And again, we don't even like listen to music that is longer than that. I guess we do.
The stories have to conform to a particular time.
Absolutely. Going over an hour and 45 minutes, couldn't do it because you couldn't take your movie and put it on television. They knew that with the commercials, the film had to be an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes, so they could then run it on TV in a 2-hour time block. You're 100% right. So people had to do that.
And MacGyver always solved the problem at quarter of.
You have to. What are you talking about? The best show was Wild Wild West. Wild Wild West. They had to have those images that would come up at the commercial breaks. I mean, you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, we are completely at the mercy of a sponsor that's going to come out at a certain period of time. So, Reverend Lynn, thanks for reminding us. It's not just music, it's actually the visual stuff that we live in. And again, every 30-minute sitcom had to actually be 22 minutes. You had to put together that thing in 22 minutes. Yeah, we're probably more formalized than our ancestors were. It's a very good point.
What do we do next week?
What are we doing next week? What are we doing next week? We're going to be here. We'll be in person.
Yeah.
And if you look, the next prophet that we read is when we read Zephaniah, also 3 chapters, which, as we said, is like kind of the norm. It's almost like, as I said, there is an average, but it's not really the average. It's you got to look at like a 3 or 4 volume book is really what these minor prophets. We're almost done with the minor prophets. We have. No, wait. We're getting to Psalms, and Psalms is pretty important because after we're done with the prophets. So we have Zephaniah, Haggai, which is also, you can see, pretty short, and then we have Zechariah, who's kind of long. As I said, he's a longer one, even though the chapters aren't very long. It's a couple weeks. And Zechariah has some very famous lines, and we actually read Zechariah more of these prophets. Hosea and Zechariah are the longest and the ones we read the most. And then Malachi, you won't quite read it at the right time because we'll be about a week or 2 off, but we actually read Malachi traditionally right before Passover. And the Shabbat right before Passover, we read this very famous line, "Lo, I will send Elijah the prophet on that great and fearful day," right? "He shall reconcile parents with their children, children with their parents."
I contended that Western Easter was rainy and cold because it happened before Passover.
Yeah, it happened a month before Passover. That's what you did. I can't do anything about it. By the way, I can't guarantee Passover is going to be more springtime, but It's supposed to be. Actually, can we get it? I don't, might be too early to know whether the weather,
My birthday.
the first night is Mike's birthday. We're celebrating by eating matzah. By eating matzah. No, we don't have quite, I don't have that yet. But it's supposedly, we're supposed to have rain this weekend, maybe a chance, but not the week after. But it doesn't, I don't have the week after that yet. But we hope it doesn't rain. But it's supposed to stop raining now. You're right. Right about now. All right, folks. Thank you, Rosemary, for reading.
you,
And I
Ron.
hope your stuff goes well today.
Thank you. My
And
dishwasher is fixed.
you see that? Your prayers are answered.
Yes.
That's a good thing.
Goodbye, thank you.
Okay. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Rabbi.
Take care. We'll see you tonight. Take care.
What's tonight?
The speakers.
Oh, shoot. I can't. Is it going to be live?
Yeah, but it'll also be streamed. It'll be streamed. You don't have to be there, but we'd love for you to be there. Anybody who can be there. Bye-bye.
Yeah.